Thank you very much, Kelly. It was about 14 years ago, I guess, when Monsanto quit being a O-line chemical company and turned itself into a plant biotechnology company. No one knew what plant biotechnology was, but it transformed agriculture. And so I was the general counsel. I was a part of that. And it's fascinating in St. Louis, you go down by the river and you still see the old abandoned chemical plants with the smokestacks that are no longer viable or competitive. And you go west into what would be like going out the 400 corridor in this area of the world. And at night, you think you're in a James Bond setting because there are these lights that are coming through these greenhouses that scientists have developed plants that can kill bugs and be Roundup resistant. Soon will lower your cholesterol. And it's an amazing success story. And many, many shareholders have made a whole lot of money. And a lot of communities have prospered because an unknown technology now is there. But underneath there, well, how did Monsanto get there? And Dow and the other companies were the universities, places like San Diego, places like the Bay Area, places like Boston, where people like you invested in technology and believed. And so there was a lot of vision, because what it takes to get a new technology that can absolutely transform how things are done, produce new efficiency, new wealth, and think about lunch. One thing that wasn't mentioned on healthcare is if we can find new technologies that drive down cost and produce greater results, how powerful that's going to be. And it's going to happen. And the question is it going to be in Georgia? And that's what we're going to talk about today. But let me finish the story, because if you went out to the places of success like Boston, it was people like GRA that years ahead got the eminent scholars, brought in the universities to the game, but then figured out how to transform that into action, which means venture money, which means entrepreneurs. And I thought it was very interesting today. I don't know whether you all saw it or not. I do read the Wall Street Journal, but I also read the Financial Times now and then. So there was an article about the Gates Foundation. And here's the quote about the Gates Foundation and how an entrepreneur like Bill Gates, now in the charitable world trying to deal with healthcare, looks at things. And it says, while many charitable ventures and government departments proceed slowly and bureaucratically, not GRA, of course, the foundation is run like a venture capital fund. Gates and his team look for risky ventures to back, convinced it is worth taking a high-risk, high-return approach to crack some of the worst problems in global health. And you'll hear that from Bob Bozeman. That's what it's all about. It's a culture of entrepreneurialism. So what we're going to talk about is, and you have three wonderful people, is how Georgia can be a leader in healthcare innovation. And you've got the CVs of our speakers, but there's a common thread with all three of them. They're about vision. They're about seeing something out there that can be, but then they get it done. So they're also about taking vision and translating it. And if you look at Mike Cassidy and what GRA has done, you look at the eminent scholars we now have in Georgia, it's remarkable. You see that hard work that has to happen. The building doesn't come out of the ground for a long time because they're working on the foundation, then it just shoots up. And Mike's going to talk to you about GRA and the work that's been done and the potential now to take those essential ingredients. You've got to have the technologist, the scientist, you have to have the universities, you need government. Bob will talk about if you don't have the right culture in your community, you won't have that entrepreneurship. But then you also have to have the private sector. And you'll hear from Mike how that's being done. Then you'll hear from Ross Mason. And here's a man that's done it so many times. As a tech graduate, he goes to Russia, and that ain't easy, to run a business. And he makes money in Moscow, probably before you're 30, I guess, Ross. And so he's shown what entrepreneurship can be. And Ross is about energy and about vision and about overcoming challenges. Because when Ross had his accident, most of us were moping and looking down and thinking, that is the worst thing I've ever seen. And Ross is ebullient and upbeat. Those of you know him, has said, this is just the start of a new challenge, and I welcome the challenge. And that's what's going to drive our success here, is that spirit that Ross Mason brings. And when you hear him speak, you'll know what I'm talking about if you haven't already heard about it. And then the evidence of what Ross can do for us is he's brought Bob Bozeman. Bob is from the Bay Area. You see in there he was an early part of Google before it looked like it had any chance. And you go down to all the early startups in the tech area, and you're likely to find Bob there as a leader. And for him to come here and believe in us and spend a week, which he's done, to help us, shows a remarkable man, a remarkable character and vision. He ain't here for the money. He's here because he believes in Ross and he believes in what we could do for healthcare. And so with that, I'm going to turn over to Mike Cassidy and ask you, Mike, to kick it off. Then we'll go to Ross, and then we'll go to Bob.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for having me here today. I'm glad to be with you all. What I wanted to do is take a minute and maybe start from the 30,000-foot level and kind of work down to set up for Ross and for Bob. A state's economic development strategy is so critically important today more than ever. We've got to figure out how we're going to rebuild our creative infrastructure to grow the new jobs. I think you all read the same reports that any of us would read, that the majority of jobs are created by small, innovative entrepreneurial firms, and that's part of the strategy in our state. If you look at the things that a state does to help with economic development, it's a broad range of initiatives. We certainly are educating students. We're preparing a workforce for that future economy. We work hard to market our state around the globe as a good place to be. We very aggressively try to attract industry into the state through a variety of mechanisms. We go after blockbuster opportunities like the Olympics or the Super Bowl and bring those big events into our state to help generate more economic opportunity. A lot of different things that we do. One of the small things that really every state does is focus on the innovation piece. Focus on creating an environment where these new jobs are generated that are in place to help commercialize, bring to market interesting ideas. And as Bill noted, if you think about the places where that really happens, and if you say Silicon Valley, or you say Route 128, or if you talk about San Diego and Austin and Research Triangle Park, I would suspect that most of you, and just about any man on the street, would know exactly what you're talking about. You're talking about this innovative culture where ideas are flowing out of great research institutions and finding their way into the marketplace through the creativity of entrepreneurs and what the venture capital community has to bring to all of that. Unfortunately, we don't think of ourselves in that way in Georgia, at least not often enough. And it took a long time for Georgia to get to the point of being able to think about this kind of economic development. With all the success that we had for a century, it wasn't really until the 70s or 80s that Georgia began to think about how do we harness our research institutions, our research universities, to create this climate where new ideas can find their way into the marketplace. So in fact, it was in 1990 that a group of business leaders in our community, a group of corporate CEOs, sat down and talked about a new strategy for Georgia, and that led to the creation of the organization I represent, the Georgia Research Alliance. And we're a partnership of the state's business leadership, a set of 6 research universities, and state government. This organization was set up as a nonprofit organization, and the state was invited to bring investment into our model. And what we do is really try to help those 6 research institutions build capabilities to generate cutting-edge research. Bill noted our Eminent Scholar program. We do that through helping to attract top research talent, some of the world's best and brightest researchers, to our universities here in Georgia and create an environment for them to do really important cutting-edge work that will generate new ideas in time. And those new ideas then, I think Ross and Bob will talk about how those new ideas are harvested and taken into the marketplace to build a new kind of an economy for the state. But our business at the Research Alliance is to focus on building those capabilities at a very high level across this set of universities. There's some focus and discipline to that. The focus is around specific areas of science and technology that we think have tremendous opportunity to be translated into economic development for the state. So if you think about the big problems that we face as a society, certainly healthcare is among the top in that list, but energy, information security. These are all big, big global challenges, and what we're trying to do is help position our research institutions in this state be prepared to bring solutions to those big challenges across the globe, because if we can address those big challenges with creative solutions, there are businesses to be built around that, there's capital that can be moved into those kinds of enterprises, there are new jobs that will be created in our state by those creative companies and those energetic entrepreneurs. So our businesses try to create conditions where these things can happen. The state's been a tremendous investor in this strategy for 20 years now. The state's invested almost $600 million over 20 years into our program of building these capabilities. And we've provided a very, very significant return to the state in form of bringing new external funding into those universities. Federal funding happens to be the lifeblood of the academic research enterprise. And when this organization was created back in 1990, our research universities in this state, frankly, did not fare very well in that equation. Our 6 institutions generated less than $400 million in 1990. This year, they're going to generate $1.4 billion of external funding, dollars that are flowing from somewhere else, the federal government, a big piece of it, into our institutions, and those dollars are used to generate ideas. We have a very, very superior enterprise that's at work at our universities today, generating these new ideas that people like Ross and Bob are going to try to move into the marketplace again to create opportunity in our state. So I'll kind of leave my remarks at that for now. I wanted to just provide a setting of economic development is very broad in terms of what a state does. There's a lot of different moving parts in that. There is an organization in our state that's at work trying to create the same kind of elements that have happened in places like Silicon Valley and Route 128. So maybe we'll dig a little bit deeper as we go on, but I'll turn it over to Ross at this point.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Bill. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I certainly am a Georgian. I grew up on a peach farm in Madison. My mother's family is from Atlanta, and I moved back here in August of '04 to try to create a culture of innovation. Bob and I met by working together on a project in Germany. They're in Wolfsburg, where Volkswagen is headquartered. There are 120,000 people, and 50,000 of them are Volkswagen employees, and they wanted to try to diversify their economy around healthcare, IT, mobility, and entertainment. And so we were involved in helping try to replicate a Silicon Valley model in Germany. And I moved back to Georgia to try to do that here. And we certainly face tremendous challenges as a state. We are number 1 in the percentage of our population that's incarcerated. We have the 2nd lowest growth rate in 20-year per capita income in the nation. We have the 3rd highest high school dropout rate. Atlanta is the 4th most congested city in the nation. We have 159 counties in our state. 57 of those counties don't have a doctor other than a veterinarian. So we have a lot of challenges, and if we're going to address those challenges, we need bold, innovative leadership. We've just come off of 8 years of very prudent, conservative fiscal management that's put us in a wonderful place as a state and created a great platform for that kind of innovation. And I believe there are 5 areas of key strategic leverage and advantage for Georgia that can help us accomplish the objective of being a key innovator, and in fact, I believe the central innovator in health innovation worldwide. Mike has talked about research. Bob is going to drill down very deeply on commercialization. So let me just talk for a moment about the model. First of all, we need to leverage our key strategic advantages that we have as a state. Mike mentioned tremendous investment in research. That's a huge advantage for us. But another area of real key strength for Georgia is the military. Traditionally, the military has been a tremendous driver of innovation. We're all very familiar with the moonshot and the Manhattan Project. The interstate highway system was actually initially a project created to move nuclear bombs around the nation. The World Wide Web resulted from the military's desire to communicate. Look at the commercialization that resulted. The military spent hundreds of billions on the war. We're going to spend tens of billions rehabilitating those men and women who've been broken in battle, and we have a moral and ethical responsibility to do it. But Georgia's uniquely positioned to do that. The three biggest issues for the military are burns, neurotrauma, and orthopedic injuries. In Augusta, Georgia, we have the nation's largest warrior transition battalion, the nation's largest burn center, and the nation's largest active duty spinal cord injury population. Bernie Marcus alone has donated over $130 million in neuroscience in Atlanta. Dr. Don Leslie, the Chief Medical Officer at Shepherd's here today. They've just done the world's first, or the nation's first, excuse me, clinical trial in regenerative medicine with stem cells, the Geron trial. The day that I was injured, I met with a scientist from Harvard and MIT named Bob Langer and his team who had, I met to discuss moving his company to Georgia called In Vivo Therapeutics. He had 120 MDs and PhDs working in his lab. He is about to pass Thomas Edison as the largest patent holder in U.S. history. And he is the only person who is concurrently serving on the Academy of Science, Medicine, and Engineering at the same time. His partner, Sir Richard Robertson, won the Nobel Prize in Medicine, who has a quadriplegic son. And they had a company where they paralyzed a monkey surgically from the waist down, had it walking 2 weeks later, running, wagging its tail 5 weeks after that. He wanted to move that company to Georgia because he believed Yerkes was the leading primate center in the country, and he wanted to do his clinical trials at the Shepherd Center. So we are a national and international leader in neuroscience, and in many ways in regenerative medicine as well. I thank Dr. Bob Neerum for being here, who's one of the real thought leaders globally in regenerative medicine. So the military is going to be a key component of healthcare innovation. It has been. That's where general surgery came from, blood transfusions, antibiotics, tremendous innovations in science. So we need to leverage our military heritage and culture. Second, translational research. We need to have a branded, focused approach with our research so that we are attracting the world's best scientists, and we leverage their tremendous leverage and collaboration. We've gotten $40 million over the last 10 years for the Center for Behavioral Neuroscience at Georgia State, where 150 neuroscientists are collaborating together. The Atlanta Clinical and Translational Science Institute has gotten $31 million to bring groups together to collaborate. The Georgia Tech Emory collaboration on regenerative medicine has gotten over $30 million in grants. The Georgia Research Alliance has determined has had over $160 million impact on our state. So that kind of collaborative research is going to be critically important. Augusta has 38,000 people working in healthcare that has a $7 billion impact, of 1,600 physicians with $1 billion of that 1,700. And it's critically important that we partner with them in that effort. Morehouse, Dr. James Lillard, the Vice Dean of the Medical School is here, is critically important in minority health, healthcare disparities. They really are a national leader. They need to be incorporated into that vision with the Georgia Research Alliance, in my view. So that's number two. Number three, venture philanthropy. The world's billionaires are going to be giving over $600 billion away during their lifetimes if they meet the Buffett-Gates challenge. We need to step forward with our brand in global health and bring those people here in a Davos-like summit on an annual basis to showcase the exceptional nature of our institutions and leaders. You don't think about it as a Georgian, but we have, if you start really adding up the pieces, and Bob maybe can talk about it, it's overwhelming the competitive advantage we have. No one else has a CDC. No one else has a former President of the United States, Surgeon General, Secretary of HHS, Ambassador to the UN, and Speaker of the House, all former, who are focused on state, national, and global health. No one has CARE International. No one has the American Cancer Society. We have no one has the sort of work that's being done globally. As Dr. Faggy alone, first head of CDC, Carter Center, and Gates Global Health. Unbelievable leadership and strategic advantage. No one else in the world has an Augusta National and the sort of wealth that represents. Or that the former Olympics and the international resources that we have as a state. And that is critically important, and Bob's going to talk about commercialization. But let me just give you one small example. I mentioned Bernie Marcus earlier. Early on in his career, when he was an early stage company and was trying to raise money for his company, he was in Texas with Ross, and reached an agreement with Ross Perot to fund 80% of his company. And it was a done deal. And then he went out in the parking lot and he said to Arthur Blank, I got to talk to him for a minute about something personal. And he went back upstairs and he said, Mr. Perot, I want to talk to you. We just have been living on a bootstrap, really pushed it. Now that we've reached this agreement, you know, I can barely pay my bills. I want to do something about my house payment, my car, and get some money up front. And Perot said, what kind of car you drive? And he said, I drive a Cadillac. He said, nobody that works for me drives a Cadillac. There's no way you're driving a Cadillac. How could you be so irresponsible, an entrepreneur, drive a Cadillac? It blew up the deal. It blew up the whole. So 20 years later, they're on a dais together like this, and there's an empty chair next to Perot, and Bernie sits down, and Perot goes, how's that damn Cadillac? Because if he hadn't been driving a Cadillac, Perot would have been the wealthiest man in America through the 80s and most of the 90s. And Georgia would not have an aquarium, which has had about a $2.5 billion impact so far on our economy. We wouldn't have that $150 million that's been given away in neuroscience. And we wouldn't have Bernie has pledged to give most of the rest of his net worth away during his lifetime and beyond. That's one person. Gallup has said, Jim Clifton at Gallup was asked how many innovators it takes to drive the U.S. economy. Arguably, 310 million people, the most inventive entrepreneurial economy in world history. And he said it was 3,000 people. The question we need to be asking ourselves as Georgians is how do we brand ourselves to attract the largest number of those 3,000 innovators? We can see retrospectively what would have happened if we hadn't had Bernie Marcus. But what is it going to cost us in the future if we lose the next generation of innovative, entrepreneurial business leaders who are going to drive the next technology of treatments, technologies, and cures? There's 6.75 billion people on the planet. 5 billion of them have access to a cell phone. Bob will talk about a technology I'm sure that he invested in that helps read your blood with a cell phone. But that's where health is going. We have the largest communications hub in the world at Fort Gordon. We have one of the best telecom infrastructures and fiber optic pipelines in the world in Atlanta. We are positioned to reach the world with global health solutions if we will create an environment for innovation, entrepreneurship, and new treatments, technologies, and cures, a platform. We are the last best hope in innovation as a society, and we need to take advantage of our resources as Georgians. So Bob's going to talk about commercialization, but let me quickly say what that means in public policy. He mentioned the income tax. Texas, Tennessee, and Florida do not have it. We've recommended with the Georgia Tax Council that we cut ours in half. We need to do that, and we need to eliminate it eventually. If I'm an entrepreneur, I mean, let me just, Jay Yadav, he just sold his company for $440 million. He got $65 million, and he's going, why in the world not move to Florida and pay for that's a pretty nice house on the beach. I mean, in the savings and income tax. But he stayed in Georgia and starting multiple additional companies. We cannot lose those kind of innovators, so we need to change that. Number two, we need pension reform. We're the only state in the nation that doesn't allow our public pensions to do alternative investments. I'm the chairman of the State Health Board. We just cut $1.1 billion out of our budget. The teacher's pension is a defined benefit. That means they're first in line. When I got here, moved back to Georgia in August, I tried to change our pension laws just as a citizen, and they decided they did not want to do that. Well, it's like, okay, we only want to grow squash and tomatoes in our garden. Well, 90% of the public pensions in America outperformed our pensions over the last 5 years. So now we've had economic problems, so now they're just left with tomatoes. So they're in front of the line for food with some people who don't even have, with lots of our citizens who don't even have tomatoes. There was no diversification in their portfolio. And that's their right if they want, but we need to decouple it. It's either not a defined benefit and you do what you want, Or it is a defined benefit, and we do what 49 other states have done, and every sophisticated public pension endowment in America, we have a diversified investment strategy. They're bringing too much risk into their strategy by not having a diversified approach. Third, we need to fund the Coverdell-Murphy Act. We're one of 2 states in the nation that is, over the last 10 years, has been funded by the federal government to link our hospital system together. So we have 60 hospitals that are linked together in a telemedicine network. Massachusetts is the other. I mentioned before that we have 57 counties without a doctor. We need to link all of our counties together in a telemedicine network by funding the Coverdell-Murphy Act. And in those counties that don't have a doctor or a hospital, we need to use the school system to do it, use that infrastructure to teach remote learning to our children. 40% of the population's obese, deal with the obesity, and then we need to use that as clinics to give those people access to health care. So with that, I'll let Bob talk a bit more about commercialization and how entrepreneurship can drive innovation in our economy if we make wise choices about how to leverage our resources and brand ourselves as a state, as an innovator.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to talk to quite a great group, I understand. This is hard for me because when I'm following such a great set of people, I have to have stature, and I can't even see over my microphone, so I already feel at a disadvantage. But the plus thing is that all of you have said a lot of great things, so I don't have much time left, so I don't have as much to say. But I thought I'd connect with maybe 3 points that I think could be beneficial. The first is really to define a little bit about what really my job, and I'll define that as the first money into a deal, is all about. Because I think people, especially with the quote about Bill Gates on throwing money at risk and stuff, angels that don't have much money in their pockets are a lot different than Bill Gates. And so what they tend to do is to be awfully cautious, and they put very small amounts of money into opportunities. And we call that really running the risk out of deals. You know, so you go into the first money opportunities, and you have to have the strongest of the deals. In other words, this becomes my best friend because he probably has one of the best quality opportunities that we would find independently being the bushes. So developing our lead sources is hugely valuable. And then putting small amounts of money to sweeten that deal up so that we can get very strong money to come in after us is important. And as you go through that chain of those decisions, that's de-risking the money. So, you know, people that are looking at what we do as high risk, I actually would want to turn your thoughts around to the fact that we're developing the fact that the big money is actually going into de-risked deals. And that's awfully good for investors that are worried about risk. And when you talk about money, that is it. You look at risk. You look at this risk and this reward, and usually they're lined up correlated. Fortunately for angel investors, if you're the first money in an opportunity, a business that then goes, you have a very advantaged position. So when we put our money in Google, it was very expensive. It was a big position. It was at a $28 million valuation. It scared us to death, that valuation. But right away, we were able to get Yahoo to come in at a $300 million valuation with $30 million. So the safety of that company had improved dramatically by just those back-to-back actions. Very important concept. If I had not been there with Ron Conway and Casey McGlynn, the partnership of Angel Investors LP, that business may not have been funded. And one of the largest valued corporations in the world wouldn't have existed. So the importance of not missing that link in the chain is huge. Once you get past that link in the chain, there's usually a de-risked attraction, which means there's a lot more people with a lot more money. A lot of times people look at all the money that's in venture capital, but they don't realize you have to look at how much of it goes to that first phase, because that determines really how much becomes available to all the other people. Very important concept, and those of you that think we're big money spenders, you know, our first fund was $28 million. We invested in 200-something companies and had 30 IPOs. So we felt pretty good about that. But we did it by partnering then with people that were really more valuable than us. We needed a certain, you know, the popular word is ecosystem. And that was one of the things I looked at here. What's the ecosystem? Again, if I didn't have Mike Cassidy to my left, I wouldn't be able to attract the honey on my right. So I looked around the ecosystem here, and a lot of people said, well, it's easy for you to do successful things in Silicon Valley because you've got all this stuff. And I have to remind them, when I drove into Silicon Valley, it was just all orchards. And you have a lot more going for you than orchards, guaranteed. So that's a real positive sign for you. So then you look at the mantra of where do you put, the phrase in Silicon Valley is, what wood do you put behind what arrowhead? And the healthcare theme that we heard at lunch and that I've been focused on this week is awfully important. And so my next segue is to talk about, is that really the bet? And I'll say it in one summary word, you betcha, to say I certainly think it is. But let me underline it in a way that I hope everybody could understand. I'm an old IT guy, and IT was really, when I learned computers, there wasn't any labels for it. At some point they got to be called MIS, and then they got to be called IT. But the reality is they were technologies that were becoming cheaper and broadening than the size of the industry, and it grew to be the biggest industry. The biggest industry is what I call big. If you can get behind the arrowhead of big, you're in good shape, and that's a big thing. Now, the IT world is only 4% of corporate revenue. That's just a small chunk of what is really a big world. How big is healthcare today? It's like 28% of the GDP, something like that. It is much, much bigger. So I think the odds are of it being bigger than IT are a safe bet. And safe bets are what I'm all about. I just look for places that are safe bets because you're really playing the odds. The hardest thing is to know all the factors that allow you to calculate those odds. But another element that's awfully important to understand is we had an echo at lunch about the competitiveness of the United States and the world playing. And you know, you hear China. How many of you have heard about China recently? You know, China to me is really a nice competitor to have. There's certain types of competitors that you look at and say, geez, this is the playing field. I got a potential guy that's a gorilla out there. They're big. They got lots of people. But they're what I call a top-down economy. Most of you that know anything about China kind of know there's a megaphone somewhere and everybody has to act a certain way or they disappear. I think that's the way it works, something like that. I remember when, you know, the comment about the Chinese saying, we will bury you. I had heard that first time with a guy by the name of Khrushchev, right, with a shoe. Boom, we'll bury you, we'll bury you. I don't know where he is, but I think he's buried somewhere. Now, being a Texan, I like choices. And it's wonderful with our approach of innovation to have choices in healthcare. You know, I went through a form of cancer that I was told I only had 2% chance to live. And fortunately, I was able to connect with a new thing that was able to save me. But if I had gone through insurance, I wouldn't have had that choice because they have a one, you know, choice that's covered that wouldn't have done anything for me. So I think giving choices to people can sometimes make the difference. In my case, that made me obligated to come back and earn that back to feel like I can prove a point there that you know, it's not just the numbers of actuarial accounting that deserve attention by the insurance companies, it's innovation. Innovation's huge, absolutely huge. Now the computer industry drove costs down. A lot of people have said that's important to do in healthcare. If you believe that, back innovation. That's what it'll do. So that's connecting to the lunch. And I think I talked a little bit about the investment strategy. And I think I talked about when I audited what's around here, I just salivated. I can't believe how much more you have available to you. We worked at our funds were called angel investors, and Angel 1 it didn't have anywhere near the resources that we were able to develop and utilize in Fund 2. But one of those resources were the great universities we had available. Google was a research project, you know, so we need you. University strengths here are huge, but all the money that's gone into universities is useless if that next chain of commercialization isn't completed. You got to have those chains completed, or you don't get the payoff. And but I look at the other things. Corporations are unbelievably important. Ross talked about Wolfsburg. You know, you'd say, what's a guy in California using a German company for? Well, as soon as I had a number to call in Germany, I had a deal coincidentally that was my first nanotech deal. So I looked at, it was a glass tinting application. And since I'd never done anything, I didn't know how to look at that deal at all. And so I immediately called Volkswagen and said, you know, have you seen these nanotech deals on glass windshields? You know, and they go, we see 15 a year. You are way behind the curve. And what did that do? That saved me a lot of money. That was a loss that I would have recorded if I had gone off emotionally on that deal without having the sources to check it out. Corporations have to learn how to lean on those small entities that are the innovative industry, you know, capabilities of saying, I've got a new idea. Those new ideas will not come through those big corporations. But when those big corporations can help spot and work with those opportunities, they'll make all the difference in the world. And I understand.
Georgia, he just told you in his first fund of $28 million, he did 200 deals. There are 2,500 venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. That next venture capital firm of 2,501 doesn't make a whole lot of difference. But in Georgia, that's very important. But it also means that we've got what Bob likes to call proprietary deal flow. It's very, there's a lot more money chasing deals out there, and there are a lot more deals with no money here. So the opportunity is here, and we need to seize that opportunity. I want to recognize quickly someone in the audience, Gerard von Hummel-Plotternick, who was with a VC, a venture firm here in town, Acutive Medical Ventures, and in 2006, and I'll let you tell about that testimony in 2006, Gerard, quickly, and what happened later, because I know you got, if you would, just quickly. Yeah, that's fine, yeah. I appreciate you coming in today to share this. Gerard now lives in California.
I do. Is this live? Okay.
Yeah.
Just quickly about me and my firm. So I'm with a healthcare venture firm called Acutive Medical Ventures. We were based here in Atlanta. We started here in 2003. We're kind of a hybrid company creation vehicle as well as venture fund. We, amongst the 4 partners, have started 23 companies that now employ about 5,000 people. Most recently, the most recent companies that we started were all started here in Atlanta, and we've started about 12 in the last 10 years or so. What we do typically is when we start them, we incubate them here in Atlanta, and then we decide over time, you know, where they should go. Where is the best place for these companies to go? And so what we've done in, I'm afraid, each of the 12 cases is we've had to move them out of state. So these 12 companies are now predominantly based in California and in Boston. Employ about 500 people, have received in venture funding, high-end venture funding, about 400 million or so. The 4 partners in our fund, we were all based here until last year. 3 of us have moved to Florida, and I've moved to California. Principally because we found the working environment so much more productive in other places, and the access to capital is much higher. So whenever we do start a company, the ability to get the company financed by the right people at the right time is crucial, because these are early stage companies, and if they do not get the right funding at the right time, they will basically die. And so we have ourselves a fund that we can put to work. We run around 240 million or so of money. And that's all aimed at healthcare, early stage healthcare, company creation. So we do our bit early on here in Atlanta, but then we typically want to make sure that that money that we've put to work stays, creates value going forward. And so the best way by doing that is to ensure the long-term success of those companies. And for various reasons, we have found that taking them out of state has been the best thing for those companies, for us. So I'm not sure what the recipe is. One of the recipes is that, like I said, 3 of us are now in Florida, and I'm in the Bay Area. CalPERS, which is part of the California Public Employee System Fund, is an investor in our fund, as is the Florida State Fund. And so certainly that has been an interesting aspect to make us feel welcome. And likewise, as we're looking now to build our next fund, which we're going to go raise next year, we are getting a lot of interest from other states who want us to move our operation into those states. So I would like to stay here. I would like to move back here. But the environment, I guess the way that a state can make a group feel about being welcome and starting companies is key here.
Just quickly, Gerard, how much aggregate revenue did those 12 companies that left Georgia that started here, what was the aggregate revenue approximately of those 12 companies?
Well, a bunch of them are still pre-revenue because they're very young. But it's probably close to about $1 billion in sales.
Okay.
But it's really more about which is, I think, an interesting feature, but I think it's more about the people that these companies hire. You know, these are typically very high-end engineer types. They're very creative, and usually they come through our companies and then spin out and create more. So the more of that kind of generation of smart people that you create or that you enable within a certain place, it's just an incredibly powerful employee creation cycle.
Thank you, Gerard. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, we'll take other questions and comments, but one thing, I'm involved with a startup in Seattle, and it's the same thing George thought. It's in the culture. In other words, in Seattle, you just feel it, that there are all these talented people that have done it before. They understand risk. They understand. So how do we get Georgia there? I understand the legislative part. Being a lawyer, I can tell you pass a law, that doesn't get it. I mean, you know, it's how do you make things happen? So you two, well, you three are all worried about this. What's the game plan? What would you like this group to do to be a part of making change?
Well, so 2 questions. I'll do the easy one, and I'll let Ross do the hard one. The easy one is, how do you get everybody on the same mantra? And what I noticed about Silicon Valley is everybody kind of copies the last success. You know, it's amazing how copying is so much easier than being creative. And when you're out there not getting money, you have to be creative. You scrounge every way possible. But when we were in Germany, we were surprised when we saw an entrepreneur come home to his parents and say, I've decided to start a business. And his parents started weeping. Said, where have we gone wrong? You know, the culture doesn't accept entrepreneurism in Germany. And here, I think, you could be just like, really frankly, at Silicon Valley. What happens is you erect a monument, which happens to be the big success, and you actually have more than you think. One of the things you want to do is start showing that model more frequently, and people will copy it. It aligns then all kinds of forces. One of the things that I noted when I was going around is there's a lot of people kind of in their own silo, or a lot of people that are conflicting politically or other ways. And when you put a model up that works, all of a sudden everybody kind of gets on the same script, and it's amazing. So I think getting some models out there do an amazing alignment. You want to get any other part of that?
Yeah, Bob mentioned his own experience with cancer. Obviously, I'm in a wheelchair, if you didn't notice. And you know, it takes, according to the Journal of American Medical Association, 17 years for best practices to become common practice in the United States. That's a long time to be dying of cancer, sitting in a wheelchair, suffering from diabetes unnecessarily. So we need, and I'm working with 2 former FDA commissioners, but we need to try to help and I think Georgia can become an environment where we try to fast-track clinical trials for FDA approval, but where we become the access point for innovation to the U.S. market. People want to be in our market. One of Bob's business partners is Don Valentine. If you look at the first dozen or so companies in technology that had over $100 billion market cap, 6 of them were funded at the man or woman and a dog stage by Valentine and Sequoia. 6 of 12. That's over $1 trillion that this guy recognized in value, and he had one investment criteria. It has to be big. Because if it's big, then I can screw up the CEO choice. We're going to make mistakes, but somebody's going to emerge that's going to own a powerful sector. And Bob's talked about how important technology is. Healthcare is even more important. And we are strategically positioned to be the innovative leader in healthcare. And we need to seize that opportunity for leadership. And part of what we want to do is create a fund of funds for angels, where we bring in a series of angel funds that are strategically focused on our areas of competitive advantage, where we mentor these people with a hybrid, Silicon Valley, Georgia model, and we begin to spin out these companies. And we just hand the people the money to run the fund and mentor them so that we start to create this culture of innovation. And you do that, we turn that wheel 3 or 4 times and spin off several hundred, over 1,000 companies. And 3 iterations and we'll pass Boston. So that's a tremendous opportunity. Go ahead, Kelly.
Got a quick question for you. There we go.
Yeah, okay.
All right. Connect the dots for us. I mean, we just heard Gerard say his company's $1 billion in sales now in some other state. Georgia Tech's done a study showing that 75% of our venture-funded companies leave the state in the last 10 years. If anyone hasn't noticed, we've got a $1.5 roughly billion budget deficit in the state of Georgia tax revenues. You did some work for us recently. Look back and say, gosh, what if we put a small amount of money, as Bob said, doesn't take a whole lot of money, small 5% of our pension funds in these kinds of investments. Many years ago, what's the impact on the state budget, job creation?
Well, the study you're referencing we did in 2006, and we looked at what would have happened if we changed our pension laws in 1990 when we created the Georgia Research Alliance. If we had changed our pension laws with a 5% allocation, many states do 20, but if we'd done a 5% allocation in 1990, and we just let that grow to 2005 and gotten average returns in private equity, venture capital, and alternatives in these areas. In 2006, which is when we did this study, we had a $16.3 billion budget at the state. If we had done pension reform in 1990 with average returns, we would have had, with only a 5% allocation, we would have had another $4.5 billion in state revenue. We would have generated another 410,000 high-tech jobs. We have 250,000 teachers in this state, 62,500 of them are retired. If we'd taken half, beginning in 2006, the upside and given that to teachers, they could have had another 13,750 benefits dollars a year in benefits for the rest of their lives. Yes.
So let me just tap on here.
Yeah.
Broad brushing is what angels love because they can see all the little nooks and crannies that got missed in that. And broad brushing, the allowance of creating all this alternative investment is interesting if it stays in the state. The first time I saw this phenomenon was in Michigan, and Michigan had phenomenal research also. They had alternative investments, and they had all the best positions in the California venture capital firms. So you got to connect those dots. It's got to end up here.
I'll just add, I think on this, in terms of what really can be done, this dot connecting side of things, I think unfortunately as a community of what angel investors we do have and what venture capital we do have, what research capabilities we have, we're a little bit fragmented. And where that tends to matter a lot is the messages that we send. And I really believe that our elected officials, when we're asking the state to help us either create a policy environment that's supportive or to provide funding for different things, I know they want to do the right thing. I think too frequently we go down there with too many different ideas. And if I look at how we do that in our state versus maybe how some other states have moved ahead, when we have this singular focus on getting the right thing done, that seems to work. Our little organization, the GRA, back in 1990, 20 of the top CEOs around town, 6 university presidents, a governor, all said, this is what we need to go get done. And to the point that was made, we've got great ideas today coming out of the research enterprise in our state that can be commercialized, that can be invested, but they're leaving town, and that happens all too often. There's another issue that we don't seem to be able to scale these little startups here, and a piece of that certainly is availability of capital, but we think there's other things within the ecosystem. So I think what, an organization or the organizations that are represented here today can help us with is to really shaping a message with that laser kind of focus that was talked about in one of the panels this morning, Kelly, and really help to deliver our message to our elected officials about what we think is required to really move the ball. And I don't think we can take 10 ideas every year. And to commend Ross, a lot of what Ross has really been focused on the past couple of years within the healthcare arena is trying to get us all together and get us on the same page. And what's great about healthcare as a backdrop for the models that Bob's talking about, the things that we're interested in, it's something that everyone can relate to, and we all know how terribly important it is. So, but I think that consistency in message is something we're going to need to work on within our community. And Bob, if you want to come here and help us do that and open up your checkbook, we'd love it.
I've seen how you guys work. You asked me to come in and make a presentation, and then I'm here for a week, and then I go back in a casket.
Well, that brand
Any
is
other question,
critically
Mike?
important that Mike said. I agree that brand is critically important. Does somebody else have another question?
John Guest, Atlanta. One of the links that I would like to see forged that seems to be broken is that we've got great medical education and research facilities here, like the one in Augusta. Unfortunately, when our Hope Scholarships and all the other benefits we have put somebody through Georgia's medical college down in Augusta, 70% of the graduates do not have an internship program that they can go to in this state. They go out of state. Most of those do not come back to Georgia. We're losing a lot of good brain power and research there. And I hope that our legislature and the others will find a way to correct that and help people stay here. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? There's another one over here.
Yeah, I think Kelly, you or Ross may have answered this question to me before, but if we're one of two states that doesn't allow our pension to go into alternatives,
We're it.
we're the only one.
Yeah.
Well, why is that, and who's going to fix that?
Since I'm ignorant of all that, I'll venture an answer, right? I think when you've never done it before, it's the worst thing to do. It's scary as can be. Comfort zones are there really as survival mechanisms. So increasing the comfort zone is something that's really important when people have to change. And I don't think there's the comfort zone because it looks ugly. That's why I focused on this is a de-risking process. It's not a bunch of wild and woolly guys betting on, fly-by-night companies. So I think the educational process, and you got to wade in very slowly and get some education and stuff. There are a lot of people that are just very expert at this, and they can help get some experience. People that have been there before actually have made so much money in this area that they then kind of blow it because they go wild. And so discipline is an important part of the investment process.
Back in the back, Justin.
Hey, I'm Judson Hill. I can answer that last question for you because for 5 years in a row I had legislation that allows us to open up investment opportunities from the pension funds into alternative investments. I can give you all the details, but just a quick summary. We've passed it out of the Senate every time. It got harder and harder. We've had some of the education community opposing us. GEA has supported it. Actually hadn't supported it, they've been neutral. But it's Page, the other organization, has strongly opposed it. Keep in mind the legislation specifically identifies, that the door is not open to the teacher retirement system, TRS, or TRA. It's not open at all to it. So it says we can't use the teacher pension funds to invest in alternative investments, just the other employee pension funds. But still, educators have locked down against it by not telling the truth. And all their literature across the state with Page, they consistently have attempted to scare all their members. And Page sometimes is a little bit more the conservative side of those two organizations. So they've locked down against it. And that's why when we first introduced the legislation, and Ross and I got to know each other well back then, we were one of, I think, 20 states maybe that didn't allow alternative investments. And then we became the last of the last state behind West Virginia that allows it. So we're at the bottom of the bottom of the barrel. We've worked it and worked it and worked it. It's continued to stop up in the House committee, and we've had more support coming out of the House, but they've continued to lock down against it there. And the reality is the politics, and the reality is the Education Association page that has stopped it and have always made it politically untenable for legislators to look at it, because they're just scaring people to death and threatening that they'll oppose them in the re-election.
So because I'm an outsider, I can do this. Close your eyes, because nobody's going to see this but me. Who would vote for it if you could vote now? So it's like pretty even 50-50 anyway.
So thank you for the chance to explain it, but we're continue to try. It's just, you go to Alabama where they can allow direct investments, which I'm not advocating, but funds of funds and 1% per year up to 5% is kind of idiotic. But this is also, and I'll stop with this, but it's a request for your help, because the investment community and the legislators and the people of the state need to speak out strongly to the benefits that you've heard these gentlemen on the panel talk about. And when I think our constituents hear it, it's a no-brainer, but thank you.
For what it's worth, I serve on 2 public boards, and we look at our pension fund, and it would be a violation of my fiduciary duty if I didn't look at alternative investments, if you see what the facts are, and just realize in this day and age, it's not buying IBM like you did 30 years ago and don't worry about it. It's the world has changed. And so I think just from a factual, what's your fiduciary duty, this really has to be looked at hard, or you're really letting down. It's not about putting the money in. It's what are you doing for investments for those people that retire.
That's right.
So that's my 2
Yeah, we don't want state money, but 90% of the public pensions in America have outperformed us over the past 5 years. The Georgia taxpayers having to pick up that bill. So that doesn't make any sense to me. It needs to be put in the best possible investment, because that's their pension. That's not an economic development tool, but it's really crippling us as a state.
It's all about education, and that's what we're doing here today. Please give me a hand to these group of experts. You've got a 15-minute break, and then we'll be back in both the conference rooms. And please remember to turn in your response forms to the back.
Yeah, well, I think, are we going to?
Yeah, we are.
Good. Yeah, I'm going to chat with you for a little bit.
Hey there. Well, I'm finding that out now. I'm going to write out. Okay. It's the Ansley room, Bob.